All right, so we've answered the first question, is it reasonable to believe in God? Now we must ask, well, which version of God should I believe in? What would be reasonable from that perspective? We have several different possibilities as monotheists. We could believe the Chinese version of God, a sort of diffusely defined, in fact, not defined at all, heavenly mandate or heaven above. We can do the Hindus' version of a monotheistic God, Brahmin, typically represented as a non personal, more an it rather than a he or a she, who's manifests himself or itself as hundreds or thousands of other gods. Then there's the God of Hebrew faith, the Judaism, the Yahweh, Elohim. There is Christianity, the Jesus Trinitarian God. Trinity is God, and Jesus as a one of the persons of the three-person Godhead. Or we can have Islam and Allah as God. Which one of these would be the best one to follow? Well, if we are looking for proof of God being God, we would at least expect that the God we are seeking would be a God who is subject to some kind of proof on our part, some ability on our part to be able to discern which version is correct and which version is not. For this reason, the Chinese God, Chinese version of monotheism, is really not going to work out very well because it's not very well defined at all. They don't have anything that's claimed to be divinely revealed scripture. Confucius is not a divine prophet in any sense whatsoever. That's not even something that enters their conversation. Never occurs to them to make that claim. So the Chinese God, I think, is out. Then we've got Hinduism. We have to look at the Vedas. But the Vedas is not very connected to history in any way, shape, or form. It's in no sense historical or testable. It gives a lot of stories, but they're sort of like the Brothers Grimm stories. They don't really have any there. So that leaves us with the classic three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Let us take a look at Islam first, although it came last. In Islam, the Quran claims that God is the greatest of deceivers. Now that's problematic. If God is the greatest of deceivers, then we have no way of trusting this God. And anything in the Quran could be a deception. How am I supposed to know? They say that Muhammad is the greatest prophet and the last prophet, yada, yada, yada. But if Muhammad himself says God is the greatest of deceivers, then in what sense can I trust that what Islam says about God is true? Maybe it's a deception on God, Allah's part in order to make sure that I don't understand. So I'm going to throw him out because there's no way he himself says that he's a liar. That leaves two. That leaves Judaism and Christianity. What do we have here for Judaism and Christianity? Why should we trust either one of these gods? Well, if you look at the Old Testament, you will find that this God of the Old Testament tends to like tests. For instance, if you take the Pharaoh's magicians and Moses, they're running what looks very much like a double-blind experiment. You've got Moses running a miracle on one side and Pharaoh's magicians seeing whether or not they can replicate that miracle on the other side. And every time Moses does a miracle, whether it be snakes or turning water into blood, the river into blood, or bringing an attack of frogs, Pharaoh immediately turns to his magicians and says, well, can you do this with your gods? And the magicians say, of course I can. We can do that. And they do it. So they demonstrate that the God of Judaism is no greater than any other God, and why should we believe in it? It's only when Moses brings forth a cloud of gnats that Pharaoh's magicians attempt to do this, fail, turn to Pharaoh and say, you know what? We can't do what he just did. We think that really may be God. So maybe you should worship. Now, Pharaoh ends up not taking the advice of his own magicians, which goes to show you that government-funded testing doesn't work when there's political machinations involved. The politically correct Pharaoh is not going to allow that the Egyptian gods are less than the God of Yahweh. But Yahweh's God, the God Yahweh, Israel's God, was willing to put himself up to the test against Pharaoh and Pharaoh's gods. And I think that shows a very sporting spirit on the point of Yahweh. And I like that, you know. That's a good, if you're going to believe in God, that's the kind of God I would like to be able to believe in. We have a similar thing going on here with Gideon's fleece. God asked Gideon to accomplish a deed, and Gideon is not sure if this statement comes from God. So he lays fleece out on the ground at night, sheep's fleece, and he says, God, if this is really you talking, you're the Lord of everything, make this fleece wet and the ground around it dry. And when he wakes up the next morning, son of a gun, that's what happens. But Gideon recognizes this could just be luck. So he lays the fleece out for a second night and says, God, I don't mean to push you here, but if this is really God, then this time let's make the ground dry, or the ground wet, and the fleece dry. And the next morning, son of a gun, if that isn't exactly what happened. So Gideon again is running a double-blind experiment here, and it works out. God is willing to allow himself to be tested when it comes to the Jewish understanding of who God is. So this increases my likelihood of believing that this God is worthwhile. And Elijah does the same thing with the prophets of Baal. Both of them set up identical altars. Both of them have identical offerings. But the prophets of Baal are unable to produce, whereas Elijah and Yahweh, the God of Israel, comes through and demonstrates actual ability to do something. So here again, in order to discern who is God, God allowed himself to be tested before all of the people of Israel so that they would see the evidence with their own eyes and be able to make a clear judgment on their own account. That, I think, is the kind of God that a scientist or someone who is serious about believing and trusting wants to be involved with. We know that the God of Israel has ordered all things in measure and number and weight. So we see that the God of Israel is very interested in the sciences, in measurement, in numbers and weight. Numbers are the only thing that matters in science. If you can't measure it, it isn't real. And this is the God who established a universe according to measure and number and weight. And he's alone in making that claim. None of the other gods in all of the history of divinity makes a claim like this. We have a god Thoth in the Egyptian pantheon, a god of writing, but we don't have a god of measurement, a god of weights. This is an unusual thing, but this is one of the attributes of the God of Israel. And when we get to Christianity, we see a most fascinating thing. Has this testing spirit gone away in Christianity? Quite the contrary. 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test everything, hold on to the good. So we are commanded to test and verify that what we're interacting with is really God and not something else. This helps us see that the God of the Hebrew religion and Christianity being an outgrowth of the Hebrew religion and holding on to that same idea that testing is necessary shows that we have narrowed down the God that we should believe in here, the God that is willing to offer proof and has in the past offered proof, that this God seems to be the peculiar specialty of both Judaism and Christianity. But in order to determine whether we should follow Judaism or Christianity, we need more information. And that, of course, will be the subject of our next video. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to hear from you again soon.